This is Sudden Wealth Radio, the first and only broadcast that explores the financial, tax, legal, and psychological issues of sudden wealth. Your host, Robert Pagliarini, is the nation's leading sudden wealth financial advisor who has earned a national reputation for working with clients who have received windfall from inheritance, divorce, lawsuit, business sale, sports entertainment contracts, stock options, and the lottery. You may have seen Robert on Dr. Phil, Good Morning America, 2020, Katie Couric, or others. And now, here's your host of Sudden Wealth Radio, Robert Pagliarini.
Today I'm talking to Robert Lamb. He's an attorney that focuses on estate planning and asset protection. Thanks for coming on, Robert.
Thank you.
Okay, so one of the big issues, and I'm experiencing this right now with a new client, she's inherited a pretty large sum of money, and with that, she's inherited about 5 different properties, and they're all rental properties. 4 are commercial buildings, and 1 is a residential rental property. And so whenever I'm working with someone new who's come into a windfall, I'm always first focused on how we can protect those assets now that they are potentially a target. So, Robert, what do you suggest that this client do to protect herself with those rental properties? What are some ideas?
Well, for rental properties, I always recommend to my clients that they never own it outright. So I recommend that they put it into something called a limited liability company. Specifically, when you have multiple rentals, I recommend a series limited liability company. And here's why. If, for some reason, there's a tenant on that property, and they decide to go ahead and sue the owner, and in this case, your client. If she owned that property outright, even if she owned it in a revocable living trust, which a lot of people have these days, that tenant could seek payment on a money judgment from her personal assets. Okay? Now, a lot of people will say that, well, no, I don't have to worry about that. I have insurance on those properties or on that property, and therefore the insurance will cover everything. And I always say, well, what happens if the insurance doesn't cover the extent of your liability on the property? Then what? Do you want your other assets to be subject to that creditor's claim? Absolutely not. You don't. Now, it's not exactly a difficult thing to set up, but for whatever reason, people just decide that it's too much hassle. It used to be that if you put one property into a limited liability company, at least here in the state of California, and you had another, and so you put that into the limited liability company as well, if there was ever a problem on one of those properties within the limited liability company, both of those properties may be subject to attachment. Now, your personal assets would be protected, but now you have more than one property that could be subject to creditors' claims, even if that one property had absolutely nothing to do with a claim rising on the other.
Now, let me just jump in for 1 second, Robbie. This is absolutely great information for the listeners. And the way I like to look at it, as well as almost like the whole putting all of your eggs in one basket. And so when someone gets an inheritance like this, all of those assets go into this one basket that she owns personally. And so the idea that we're talking about is how can we create separate baskets that we can then put some assets into? So in a typical LLC, you set it up, you could put all of the properties in the one LLC.
That's correct.
And the idea that you're talking about is, well, that's true. You could put all of the rental properties, these 5 rental properties, into this LLC. But let's say a tenant at one of the properties gets hurt, sues the LLC. So you think, okay, well, they've sued the LLC. They can only attach just that one property. But no, they can attach anything that's owned by that LLC. So all of those other properties, those 4 other properties, are now subject to risk. And so now let's talk about the series LLC, because a lot of times, and I've done this in the past with clients over the years, is if they do have multiple properties, I've recommended setting up separate LLCs for each property. But you have a potential solution where you only have to set up one LLC. Talk about that.
That's right. Well, absolutely. It's called a series LLC. And so what a series LLC is that it is an entity where you have, let's say, a master holding company, if you will. We'll just call it the master LLC. But that LLC owns little subdivisions in different series. And so each series ends up owning a particular asset, in this case, a particular rental property. So if I had 5 rental properties, I would set up the master series LLC, and then I would have Series A would hold one property. Series B would hold another. Series C would hold another. D, E, and so on down the line. I mean, you can add as many properties as you want to this. The way that a series LLC works is that each of these series is insulated from creditors' claims from the other. So if there was an issue with respect to the property in Series B, that creditor could not get the property that's in Series A or Series C or Series D. So it's a tremendously powerful tool. And the great thing about it is that it's still, even though you have multiple series, for record-keeping purposes and tax reporting purposes, it's one entity. So as far as ease of administration, it is simpler than going ahead and forming multiple LLCs.
And that honestly is always the feedback that I've received when I've suggested clients set up separate LLCs, is that it is a hassle to set them all up, to administer them, to report taxes for each of those.
Right.
And so with the series LLC, it is important for each of those properties in each of the series to have separate books and records, correct? Different bank accounts.
That's right. But it will all eventually flow up to the master. And so when it comes to filing income tax returns, there will be one income tax return. And that's huge. That's absolutely huge. Because if you filed, or if you formed separate LLCs, and let's say you had 5 different entities, well, you're going to have a federal and state return for each of them. And that can become cost and time prohibitive.
Absolutely. It's very cumbersome. Most people don't want to do that. Now let's talk about the potential risks with the series LLC. My understanding is that it's never really been tested in court, whether this whole idea of the Series B is shielded from Series A and C, that hasn't truly been tested. So we're not really sure if it's really going to be effective.
I think that's a valid criticism of it. It hasn't been tested out here in California. Now, where the states that they are legal, like Delaware and Nevada, if the action is in either of those courts, I think that the series LLC works. Each of those states has a public policy to go ahead and provide people that take advantage of that entity with asset protection. So they're going to uphold it. The question then becomes, will it withstand scrutiny in other states that don't have series LLC laws on the books? For instance, California. I think it will. I think, though, what's critical, though, is you have to have a choice of law provision, and that choice of law provision in the operating agreement is going to have to recognize that any litigation that would be tried under the laws of the state that has the series LLC statute, so either Delaware or Nevada.
Okay, so it's only Delaware and Nevada that have this series LLC.
Well, that I'm aware. There may be some others that are coming online, but the ones that I deal with, particularly with my clients, are Delaware and Nevada.
Is there any advantage to doing Nevada over Delaware or vice versa?
Well, a lot of practitioners like Delaware because their corporate law is well established. Whereas, I don't think there's anything wrong with Nevada. I mean, it's just newer. There's probably not a certain comfort level there with some practitioners. I've done both. And, I got to say that for some people, they like Nevada, especially if they live here in California. There's some comfort knowing, that they're taking advantage of laws of estate that are right next door. So if they have bank accounts that belong to the LLC, or they want to use certain types of trust services with respect to that LLC, they can do their business, just a few hours away if they have to go ahead and travel.
And of course, they could potentially write off their trips to Vegas if they have a Nevada LLC. Just kidding. You don't have to answer that, Robert.
There's a valid business reason, yes, but I'll leave that up to the CPA to decide.
So the other potential risk is that, in the feedback sometimes that I've received is setting up all these LLCs, is that, especially in California, that you have this franchise tax fee for each, and the minimum is $800 a year. And so with the Series LLC, your position is that even though there could be multiple series within the one LLC, that it's one franchise tax fee. Is that right?
That's the position we take, and that there is a technique that we use to go ahead and hold title for each of those properties within the series that we think will escape multiple franchise fees. The Franchise Tax Board doesn't necessarily look at it the same way, and that hasn't yet to be litigated. So there is a potential risk there that despite how you carefully hold title in that master series LLC, whether or not the Franchise Tax Board will go ahead and impose an $800 franchise tax on each of those properties. That remains to be seen.
Is it communicated to the Franchise Tax Board that this is a quote-unquote series LLC? Are they even aware that that a client would have this?
Well, they would be aware if the client if you go ahead and register that LLC in the state of California. That's really the only way they would know about it. Having said that, we do go ahead and register our LLCs with the state of California, with the Secretary of State, so that they're qualified to do business here.
Right. So if you're a resident of California, then you could set up a Delaware or Nevada series LLC, but it would be registered in California.
That is correct. As a foreign entity.
Foreign entity.
Right.
And your Delaware or Nevada LLC could hold assets anywhere in the country.
Correct. And a lot of our clients do that. So, maybe they have rental properties in Utah, maybe they have them in Texas, any state. You can certainly go ahead and put those properties into the LLC. There's really no geographical limitations.
Okay, so the takeaway here is if you have multiple properties, you're concerned about protecting your assets, then one strategy is to form an LLC or an other entity to hold each of those assets, or you can think about creating this series LLC, which should cost less money each year and should be less cumbersome to administer. And you should receive the same asset protection as if you had multiple LLCs.
Yes, absolutely.
And I guess the one thing that I really want to focus on is if you're doing the series LLC, that you do have to have separate bank accounts for each of those series.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. Well, this has been hugely helpful. This is an area that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. And I appreciate you coming on and educating us a little bit more about these structures.
All right. Thank you.
This was Sudden Wealth Radio. If you feel overwhelmed because of a recent windfall or are looking for better strategies to grow your assets, Robert and his firm have developed a national reputation for providing financial planning and investment management to clients globally. They are more than happy to answer any questions, big or small. So if you have a question about how they work or a question about your own situation, go to www.pacificawealth.com or email Robert directly at robert@pacificawealth.com.